Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson from Unit 2, Constitutional History, is Lesson 13 about enumerated power. In this lesson, you'll learn about the enumeration of powers in the Constitution, the reason for enumeration. You'll learn that enumeration is found in Article 1, Section 8. You'll learn some examples of the enumeration of powers, and you'll learn about the implications of enumeration of powers. To enumerate something literally means to number it, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it can also mean to list a thing. So when we refer to enumerated powers in the Constitution, we're talking about powers that were specifically listed in the Constitution. Now, this is one of the items that was mentioned in a previous lesson that was among the multiple limitations that were constructed into the Constitution to try to control the powers of the national government. Others that were previously mentioned were things like federalism, separation of powers, checks and balances. Enumeration of powers is another example of this attempt to build into the Constitution ways to prevent the national government from becoming too powerful. The enumeration of powers is found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And on this slide, you see some of the text of that enumeration of powers. Now notice it begins by saying, Congress shall have power to, and then it lists things that Congress has power to do. The entire list, which wouldn't fit on just this one slide, is seen on the next slide. These are all the enumerated powers that Congress is given in the United States Constitution. And if we look through this list, we can see how it was constructed specifically to address the concerns that had led up to the Constitutional Convention. Among the powers that were enumerated are the powers to lay and collect taxes and pay debts. Remember, this was a problem in the Articles of Confederation, that the Confederation Congress had no power to directly tax to pay off the debts from the Revolutionary War. Another power specifically enumerated in the Constitution is the power to regulate commerce, specifically foreign commerce, commerce with Indian tribes, and what we call interstate commerce, or in other words, commerce among the states, things being bought and sold that go across state lines. This is another thing that was put into the Constitution specifically to address major concerns under the Articles of Confederation. Please recall from a previous lesson where we discussed that trade was difficult between these 13 newly formed states because they actually ended up taxing goods and services coming in from neighboring states more than they did coming from foreign countries, like England or France or wherever. And so, as a consequence, the economy was struggling. And the meetings that began to take place between the states that eventually led up to the Constitutional Convention were organized around resolving these trade problems and trying to create freer trade among the states. Well, that problem was taken care of by giving the power over interstate trade to Congress to set uniform rules for the entire country. Another concern during the Articles of Confederation period was that there were 14 different kinds of money being circulated. And that made it hard to enter into trade because you had to exchange the money. Well, that was taken care of in the Constitution by granting Congress the enumerated power to coin money, one type of money for the entire country, which would then be all 13 of the states together. Lastly, among the powers that we're going to make specifically point out in this lesson was the power to declare war and raise an army and a navy and provide for militias to fight. This was a response to the concerns that were made apparent during Shays' Rebellion that we discussed in a previous lesson. Remember, from Shays' Rebellion, it was learned that the states individually were not strong enough to even put down rebellious farmers, much less defend themselves against foreign invasion. So the Constitution provides a way for the United States Congress to raise a common army and navy for all of them that would be strong enough to defend them. Now, the listing of these specific powers in the Constitution has an implicit assumption, and that is that if we are going to, as the people, grant Congress specifically certain powers to do certain things, we must assume that any power that was not on that list of those granted is denied to Congress. Or another way to think about it is, if it doesn't say on the list that the national government can do a thing, then we have to assume that it can't. Now, there's a logical reason for this assumption, and that is, if Congress was given a general power to do whatever it needed to do, then there's no reason to give it a list. So the fact that a list was provided means that it didn't have a general power to do anything it wanted to do. Instead, it must only have power to do things on the list. Now, this limitation of Congress's power ends up being a limitation for the entire government, because Congress can only pass laws for things that are on the enumerated list. Then the president can only execute laws that are passed by Congress. So he can't go out and execute a law for something that Congress didn't have power to make a law for in the first place. So limiting Congress' power to make laws effectively limits the president's power to then go execute things. He can only execute what they created under the powers they had. And that then limits the courts also, because they can only judge whether or not somebody has obeyed a law that Congress first passed. So Congress being limited to only pass certain kind of laws then limits the kind of cases that federal judges can even hear and decide. So in this way, enumerating the powers of Congress actually limited the power of the entire national government to only be about those things on the list that was enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. So now let's review what we learned in this lesson. First of all, what does it mean to enumerate something? Is it to add to it, or subtract from it, or multiply it, or to list it? Well, as the word is used in describing the Constitution, it means to list a thing. In this case, listing the powers of government. So why are powers enumerated? Is it to increase them, to limit them, to change them, or to make them permanent? The correct answer is to limit them, because, as was described just a moment ago, the mere fact that a list is given of things that can be done creates the assumption that things not on the list can't be done. And in this way, the overall powers are limited. Where are the powers enumerated in the Constitution? Is it in Article 1, Section 1? Article 1, Section 8? Article 2, Section 2? Or Article 4, Section 1? It's in Article 1, Section 8. Now, this is one of those few nitpicky sort of things that you really should remember, because it'll come up many times later in the course, referring back to these enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. So while in general, in this course, you're not going to be required to remember the specific location of things in the Constitution or the specific dates that things happened, this is one of those exceptions where remembering the specific location is actually critical, so that you'll know what's being talked about later on in the course when Article 1, Section 8 is referred to. Which is not an enumerated power? In other words, what power has not been given to the national government? Is it to regulate public health care? Is it the coining of money? Is it raising an army? Or is it laying taxes? Well, if you go through that list in Article 1, Section 8, you'll find that public health care is not among the things on the list. Coining money is, raising an army is, laying taxes is, but not dealing with the healthcare system. What is the implication for the enumeration of powers? Is it that things not listed can't be done? Is it that things not prohibited can be done? Is it that listed powers are merely suggestions? Or is it that all power is given, even if it's not listed? The implication of the enumeration of powers, as we've said several times, is that powers not listed can't be done. If it doesn't say you can do it, you can't. That's the general assumption for Congress's enumeration of powers. All right, that does it for lesson 13 about enumerated powers. Next lesson will be from Unit 2, lesson 14, about Articles 4, 5, and 6 of the United States Constitution.